Okay.
And we
Getting started on March 19th, Utilities Committee meeting. I guess we're starting with WSUD draft franchise agreement.
okay, so if you recall, about a year ago, I came to realize that the city really didn't have, we had franchise agreements with a few of our utility operators. I think we had Puget Sound Energy, Cascade, and Wave. We don't have anything. We didn't have a franchise agreement. CenturyLink. Who else? Mustang Utility District. There's a few more. KPUD. And so Sharon and I embarked down. And then the ones that we did have a franchise agreement with, they didn't have a bond set up. And so we started with Wave, and I think if you recall about 4 or 5 months ago, we finished everything with Wave as the template. And the issue is that the city is charged with maintaining public right-of-way. And so when somebody comes in, whether it's just a contractor, like Casco that's just putting in a water service, they have to get a right-of-way permit. And with that right-of-way permit, they have to do a traffic control plan and provide a performance bond in case, and I won't use case, I'll just say a general, let's say a contractor comes out and they get out over their skis and they suddenly realize that they're not really qualified to do this work. Well, we have the performance bond at 100% so that if they're out over their skis and they make a mess, when we have to come in, we can do that. Once the work's done and accepted, then we require them to do a 2-year maintenance bond so that if they've cut across the street, it starts to sag, so that's standard, and it's to protect our roads. And so most of the contractors that we deal with, they have a bond mechanism in place that we're actually setting up now more formally, now that we have Eileen over there at 720, and with Ellen, we've set up a new system where we track everybody's bonds, and we have a spreadsheet now that says, oh, this performance bond now goes away because the work's accepted, and now it moves over to the 20% of the value, which is now a 2-year maintenance bond. And then you can have a contractor that has like 3 of those, and then after 2 years, one of them comes off, and the other one, so it's like a revolving credit account, right? And so that's what we're doing with the utilities. So Wave was the first, because we were literally, the city was letting these utilities just doing stuff in the right of way without getting these bonds in place. And I had always assumed that these were in place. I'd always been told that they were in place. But then when Eileen, Ellen, and I started to dig into it, it's like, oh no, they don't have a bond. So again, we started with Wave. Wave was very cooperative. They've put a $50,000 amount in an account, and it's just a revolving credit thing, and we're tracking that. And it makes it really easy when they come in to do work. There's sometimes we don't make them, if they're just stringing something on a pole, we don't do anything. But if they're hiring a contractor like Totem or something like that that's like digging, then we do. And so it makes it easy for us to get them their permit quickly, because we can say, yep, you still have $42,000 on the account. This value, is $10,000 now, but it'll go down to $2,000 later, and you're good. So we're just doing that. So once we did Wave, and we're going to get to everybody, we ran into a bit of a loggerhead, I think that's the term, with West Sound.
Surprise.
West Sound basically just said, hey, we're your partner, we operate this treatment plant together, and we're not doing it. We're not doing a bond. We're not going to sign an agreement. And so Sharon we've had probably 3 or 4 back and forths between our attorney and their attorney, and they came back on the agreement. They tried to strike, and that's what you got in the packet is this current draft. I didn't print out the whole thing, I just did the cover. Mm-hmm. But basically, we received a red line back from their attorney and Mike Wilson that had everything to do with bonding and stuff just like struck out. And we said, no, we're not, you're not listening to what we're saying, because you're no different than a contractor, or you're no different than Puget Sound Energy. You're tearing up our roads, and if you don't do it correctly, we have no way of going back other than spending taxpayer money to fix it. We're not going to do that. And so we got a lot of pushback. We were making no headway. The next step was then Mayor Potautu met with Commissioner Lundberg with a number of photos that we took throughout the city, but within West Sound's district, of failing road sections, damaged sidewalks. And he met with Jerry and said, hey, you know, you need to sign this agreement. And Jerry seemed like he was on board, and so we made another by West Sound's director and attorney, and we got the same, we're not doing it. So where we're at right now, and I think Rob's going to mention it tomorrow at the meeting, he'll bring it up, is before I send this email out, he wants the full council to be fully aware. Because the email's fairly direct. It says, you're not working in our right of way unless you sign this agreement.
Do you think need any kind of permits? I mean, what can we withhold if they don't
That's
sign
all.
it?
That's the only thing we can do is withhold a right of way permit.
Okay, so they have to get a permit then.
Or they don't get a permit, and then we
Sue them?
you stop work them, and then working without a permit, that becomes a much larger issue as opposed to them getting a permit. So right now, we're saying, until you sign this permit, we're not going to issue a right of way permit. If we see you working in the right of way, we know you're doing it without a right of way permit because you've not come in and requested one. So we're just going to stop work you. You know, it's not a big deal. You sign the agreement. Depending on how much work you think you're going to do in the right of way, you just go to the bank and you set up. It can be an escrow account. It can be a letter of assignment. It's not a big deal. You know, Casco can do it. You know, so can you. It's not a big deal. You just set up an account, and we manage the amount, and we'll tell you, hey, you're exceeding your $20,000. It's not a big deal, and we're getting into about a bit of headbutting. And so I'm going to be sending this email out once I get the thumbs up from council to just say, no, this isn't your option.
And there's not other agencies that don't do this, because if you don't have franchise agreements where you have bonding in place, then two things happen. One, you have, you know, the next company down the street says, well, they don't have to bond it, why do we have to bond it? So now all of a sudden we're heaping more on the taxpayers' back in risk. Right. And then the second thing is bonding capacity ensures that you don't get some of the fly-by-night contractors that don't have the capability. You know, there's many companies here locally that wouldn't have been able to bond something like the Tremont project because they haven't demonstrated, you know, the fiscal capacity to manage something that large. So it's right. Comical a little bit because it's so simple and common. I don't understand it.
Yeah, I'm at a loss. I just don't. I imagine they don't.
Well, does Manchester Water do it with the county, for example? They probably do.
I'm sure they do. The county is very strict.
Okay. I don't think it's an issue.
It isn't.
No, it isn't. The county actually has a standard where they don't even allow you to open cut their roads. And if you do, you have to do 100-foot overlay. You have to taper it back. You have the trench itself has certain requirements.
Tell them we're thinking of that.
Well, that's ultimately what we're going to end up doing is if we're going to be, the other thing that we're working at is a street moratorium where if we know that we're going to do work on a road, let's say Horseman, we'll have, when that work is done, we'll let all the utilities know well in advance that if somebody comes back 2 years later and then wants to run a sewer up, that they're going to have, because we're gonna have a moratorium on it. The only way they're gonna do that is to basically overlay the road. You know, do their work and then repave the road. So, and the county does that. Mike's grabbed, and there's a number of templates out there. So I guess basically what we're doing is, you know, we know that our streets through the pavement management system really are better than we thought. I know there are areas where they're really bad, but we scored a 71, which wasn't bad at all. But we certainly can't let, you know, as Thomas was saying, you got somebody that has no background, no bonding ability because of their history. And we've had a few contractors here, I won't name names, but, you know, we really had some fly-by-night contractors that were very problematic. And unless you've got that bond, you've got nothing. So that's it. That's just more of a heads up. You'll hear more, I believe, tomorrow night. And then my goal is to send the email out, and we'll see what happens.
Does West Sound have a new manager?
No, Mike is still part-time. I know they're out advertising for a new manager. So
Is he interim, or is there a deadline, or is he just indefinite?
I think June. I think he's planning, he wants to be out by June.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know that he retired and then he came back part-time,
Okay.
and now they're,
So do we pay like half of his salary theoretically?
no, we
Okay.
pay
Okay, because we don't have
pay for
anyone on the interview panel.
20%, I think.
25?
20, I think.
Okay.
That's all it is.
Because we don't have someone on the interview panel, I don't think. And maybe we don't need to.
No, I mean, we think that the district, and I think it's 20%. And I don't know if it's his.
I mean, I know that we pay into the treatment plan.
Yeah, but I thought we
And then our
paid.
wastewater treatment fee.
Right, but that's, part of his salary is at the plant, so it's that portion, I think it was 20%.
So on the email, is anybody on here at West Sound? Because I was wondering who, you know, would the expectation be that Rob would forward that then to their commissioners, or?
Well, and that's what, so this
I
this
mean-
email doesn't have,
Michael Wilson.
Because I don't know the players yet, that's what I was
Yeah,
asking.
he's
Yeah.
right now, the manager,
Okay.
the contracted manager.
yeah, so Sharon is the attorney, obviously
Right.
Rob,
Mhm.
Cindy, and Eileen, because they kind of manage the bonds. I got Mike Pleasance, and then I got Mike, and then I was gonna add Jerry Lundberg potentially.
Uh-huh.
So again, we'll get that direction
Yeah,
tomorrow.
no, I was just curious. what
Yes.
that is, what that's-
Yes.
And I know that Rob wants me to send it instead of
Yeah.
him.
Okay, so we'll hear more about that on Tuesday.
You'll hear more about it, yeah.
All right, so on to the next, the Foster Pilot Project.
Yeah, and then in your packet, you've got this letter that we got from Ecology, so Thomas can speak to the Foster.
Yeah, so just real briefly, I think that this letter is more just to kind of document a little bit, get it into the packet, but, you know, I think that most people are aware of the capital budget that wasn't passed last year at the state level, and that was due to the Hearst impasse, not being able to come up with a solution there. Out of the Hearst discussion came an opportunity for the Foster Pilot Program. And municipal water law has been a nightmare for 40 years. And it's not something that we can fix tomorrow, but for the first time, and I would say probably 2 or 3 decades, we're seeing an opportunity to actually push the water rights conversation forward, which is pretty exciting. And this idea came about that the state would commission a pilot program that would allow people to, jurisdictions to investigate alternative mitigation, which is something that is much more meaningful to the environment, and it's also, in many cases, more feasible and more cost-effective to municipalities.
Mitigation for withdrawal.
For withdrawal. So essentially, instead of pulling water out of the ground and then dumping it back into a creek to mitigate for the supposed or not supposed loss of in-stream flow, at the wrong pH and chlorinated and at the wrong temperature and all that. We're seeing the opportunity to investigate programs that will create fish habitat, satisfy some of the environmental NGOs and the tribes, but still allow municipalities to plan and construct for the future and growth and ensure potable water sources for years to come. What that looks like is a committee of, I believe, 15 agencies. Half of them are made up from state representatives, and they were allowing 5 participants to be written into the bill. We were able to get into that bill, so we're called out as one of the participants. We have until November of this year to come up with alternative mitigation strategies, and we will be a part of that committee moving forward. We will, in turn, in about 2 years, make a recommendation back to the state that says, hey, we've worked with the tribe, Fish and Wildlife, we've come up with these ideas, and we think that they're viable. It looks like you had a question.
Well, I do. But finish what you have to say first.
Well, I think that the important thing to take away from it, and I'm more than happy to, I mean, I could talk about this for hours, but I think that the important thing is the city has a lot going on in the water rights world right now. And for us to mitigate for the impact of one deep aquifer well, you're not talking about a lot of water, but you're talking about a large reach. So you could be mitigating in 5 to 6 different streams, some of which might not be within city limits. And so to be able to get water to those locations would be extremely problematic. Through this program, not only are we allowed to do things that are localized and much more cost effective, but we're also put on a priority path to where our applications and permits don't fall into the queue and then a year later they get processed. We go to the front of the line every time. So we're going to see reduced permitting costs, increased permitting response. And to be quite honest, I think that it'll be exciting to have the City of Port Orchard's name on a program that develops strategies to allow the entire state to more effectively manage their resource. So.
And I mean, even though we're going to have 12 and 13 drilled, the city still needs to, we've got the permit to drill, but we still haven't finalized our mitigation on those, right?
No, and when you start talking preliminary permit versus a certificated right, you know, drilling a well is really a 4-step process with ecology, and it takes a lot of paperwork and there's a lot of negotiation, and this takes a lot of the ambiguity out of it. It makes it really a clear path. Now, I'm not going to say it's an easy path or a quick path, but it's easier and it's clearer for us.
So to get to, so the terms, so you go from permitted to perfected?
Permitted to certificate to perfect. Yeah, once you have a certified perfected right, you are now protected by the municipal water law. The Department of Ecology cannot take those rights away from you. There are 2 court cases pending that are challenging some of those ideas in the municipal water law. I don't think that they'll get very far. But the nice thing is like I said, for the past 3 decades, you've never had a formalized state-sanctioned committee where the tribes and purveyors are sitting down together and coming up with a joint strategy. And so one of the problems that we've run into in the water industry is we have these negotiations in a vacuum. We talk to ecology, they talk to the tribes, we talk to the tribes on the side. There's often this feeling that things aren't above board. They're trying to protect in-stream flows and fish habitat. We're trying to ensure that we have potable solutions for the future or today in some cases. And the tribes always had a seat at the table. It was just litigious. They would just sue you if they didn't like what you had agreed, or they'd sue ecology. Now, with everybody having some skin in the game, I think that anytime you can bring all your stakeholders together and negotiate it above board, it's pretty difficult for us to come to a solution together, and then I go back out and sue Ecology because I don't like what we already agreed to.
Well, I think it's also important, and correct me if I'm wrong, but 10 years ago, this wouldn't have happened because the health of our aquifers and the reality of stream bank recharge was so ambiguous that now that, and if you remember, the city joined in with WaterPack to do that groundwater study. Isn't that groundwater study really the basis now where we're actually being able to, we have now documented results of the health of our aquifers, and even the tribes are now coming around to, yeah, no, it doesn't make sense to just pump water into the streams at the wrong pH or the wrong temperature. We need to look at other mitigation rather than just this kind of standard of, yeah, this is what you want you to do, and there's no science behind it. Now that we have the science behind the aquifers, isn't that like giving us a basis for these conversations?
Yeah, I mean, so the USGS, they are a very non-political, science-based group that conducts analysis on things like, our aquifers, for example. And so years ago, we had these models, and they were never truthed. You didn't know if they were real or not. They were theoretical. And so, not to be crass, I'm sure that Doug over at Ecology would not appreciate me saying this, but it used to be you just went into a dark room somewhere in Tumwater, and you guys, okay, well, we want you to mitigate 42 gallons a minute. And then we'd say, no, we'll do 12. And it was just kind of like this, it was like you're buying a car, right?
Right.
And so the USGS did a 5-year study where they monitored, I would say 80% of the groundwater wells in Kitsap County. And what they found out was we only use about 5 to 6% of our annual recharge. In fact, 33% of our annual recharge actually gets lost to salt water because we have a lot of water. We've also seen that if you were to increase the pumping demand of every well by 15% in Kitsap County, it doesn't even move the needle on in-stream flows. In fact, if you increase the deep aquifer pumping by 15%, we see in-stream flows increase because we know that the water that we pull out of the ground 1,500 feet deep doesn't come from surface. It doesn't pass through those different confining layers. So I guess in short, yeah, the USGS model has really given us the ability to sit down and say, okay, now we have the facts, so let's have the actual conversation.
Right.
Is that information what helped us decide not to invest more in well 10?
I think I can feel this one. Because we have, when well 10, and I'll use the term, failed, because we know that when it was drilled after the fact, we know that there was a casing failure where they had to go down in, or they had to change the size of the casing. The day that happened, because they had to go deeper and then they had that failure, immediately that 2,000 gallon minute production was cut down to 14 or something because the casing size and the size of pump. So that's the first thing that happened. The second thing that happened was, as the well sat, and nobody knew this, the well driller didn't tell us, nobody, is that when that sat, it's a artesian well. It has to be exercised.
Right.
And it wasn't exercised. So by not being exercised and by whatever the failure was, and again, 1,500 feet down, we're speculating as to why the screens are plugged. Is that it could be whatever that material was with the failure went down inside the casing or something. It's not producing. We weren't able to get it pumping. The reason well 10 was where it was at was because there was no study, and Ecology and the tribes basically had this non-scientific based ban that no wells would be drilled within the, I think the term they used was within the area of influence of Blackjack Creek.
The upper reaches.
The upper reaches. And so well 10 was never placed strategically for the resource. It was it was placed as a mitigation. And it was as far away from where it needed to be as possible. And so because we had the study combined with the failure, the inability for it to produce, we were able to transfer its location to 13 through our DWSRF loan.
And there's I mean, not to get too deep into it, because like I said, this is a massive subject. People go to law school just to study this one particular thing. In the 70s and 80s, and really getting into 91, 92, the Department of Ecology was very passive, and people drilled wells when they wanted to, and these water rights applications would just sit there forever, and there was really little accountability and at the same time very little guidance, and the tribes didn't know how to handle this, and everything was just kind of brewing and coming to a head. In 1994, you had the bloodletting of water rights, where the Department of Ecology issued over 500 cancellations, or they said, no, you guys aren't drilling anything. And that was huge. It was a huge hit to the industry. Following
that was the growth management through non-issuance of water rights.
Yes. Following that, you had what I've kind of called the decade of darkness, where everybody just kind of, whatever ecology said, they just did. So if they said, we want you to put well 10 within 75 feet of salt water, which is a terrible idea, you just did it, because otherwise they were not going to give you a water right. And so, especially as a council or a board of a special purpose district or a PUD, if your option is no water or water where I don't want it, you're going to take that water where you don't want it. Unfortunately, I would say that the Department of Ecology's lack or inability to appropriately manage that firestorm for 10 years resulted in many people putting wells where it wasn't cost effective. And ultimately, because we're making successes now, it's probably not something that will get talked about a whole lot. It just kind of an is what it is thing. The good news is we are having the conversation. We are getting to where we can put these wells where they need to be. And it's exciting that we're there, because if you'd asked me 4 years ago if we'd be in this position, I would have said no.
And there's another correlation piece, which is beneficial use. And one thing that ecology started to do when I first came here was they started to come back and they were really looking at how much you were producing versus how much you were actually selling, how much you're wasting, your efficiencies. And they were really looking at jurisdictions that had water rights on paper but weren't actually producing and selling, and they would come back and they would say, look, we're going to cut you back because you're not putting to beneficial use what you're saying, because you're holding up our ability to give water rights to other people. You're reserving something that you can't produce, right?
Right, and that was challenged. That went to the Supreme Court, and they upheld the municipal water law and said, no, you can't do that. Now, there have been 2 cases, like I said before, recently, where they're attacking that again. But the conversation that ecology was having with Mark at that time, like we've talked about, we didn't have the science. See, now we can point to it and say, the amount of water that we're using is insignificant, is almost de minimis compared to what's in the real world. That's what's exciting, and I think the Kitsap model, the Kitsap numerical model, has been touted as the example of what everybody should be doing in the state to try and better understand their water resources.
I just read too, Kingston is working on an addition to their plant, their sewer plant, and that they're going to be working on having more water filter back down through the soils instead of releasing it to streams. Is that kind of a new thing, or?
So when you talk about aquifer recharge, it's been in concept a good thing for a long time, but nobody's really done it. The advent of reclaimed water in our area, while it might be new to us, it's not new to other areas.
Yeah, just go to like Phoenix and
Well, right.
salt. That
And
salt,
our purple
salt,
pipe thing, I mean, it's just
Salt
kind of.
River project. Is
Right. So what Kingston's doing is they are investing, and they had Goldsmith did a study for them 12 years ago, almost 15 years ago now, and they've been planning on this reclaim facility where they're going to do some expansion, and they're going to start trying to put that water back into the ground. Reclaim water, and if you look at the finances of it, is a very difficult thing to finance. However, I've talked with some folks over there, and I know that they are going to try and play the water right game. I think eventually what you'll see is a percentage. So if I take out 10 gallons, right, then I have to mitigate for those 10 gallons. But if I put 10 gallons back in, maybe they'll give me a mitigation credit of like 2.5 gallons. So you're now recharging that aquifer. You know, it shouldn't be $1 in, $1 out, but it also shouldn't be $1 out, nothing back in. So, yeah, it's not ahead of its time, but they are
complicated.
the tip of the spear.
Yeah, I think, God, it's been about 8 years since the water community put on that kind of water resources presentation that they had up at the county. And, you know, you're talking about down in the Midwest where they truly do have water issues. You know, they're actually providing tertiary, where they're selling for potable use treated sewage. It's, you know, it goes all the way through from primary, secondary to tertiary. So, and it's not just used to flush toilets. They're actually, I think the Salt River project, I think, is using.
They're treating the Class A.
They're treating the Class A.
Really?
And so the reality of it is water is, you know, this is a sidebar, but, you know, if I were to ask you what's a primary food,
It's the new gold standard.
what's a primary food and what's a secondary food, I was asked that question. I said, oh yeah, so, you know, raw fruits and vegetables and meats, lean meats are primary foods. It's like, no, those are secondary foods. Primary food is air, water, relationships, career, because they're all about nurturing. And so, and then I, after somebody told me that, I actually started to choke on a piece of chicken. And this individual took that opportunity to say, see, somebody's teaching you a lesson. What was more important at that point, that piece of chicken stuck in your throat or having some air to breathe? And I said, yeah, okay, well, please don't use this as a teaching moment. But it is true that air and water, there will come a time when there is no water through the Midwest due to fracking or whatever's going on, and everybody will have to move out of the Midwest. They'll move to the north. And so when nobody's living, because it's like the Sahara Desert, you know, where Arizona might be right now, that's when water resources in here are going to be very important. And that day will come, I guarantee it. It'll be generations from now, but there will be a time when because that's why Purple Pipe didn't work up here. We tried to use the reclaimed water, and it's just too soon. But you go down south, it's everywhere. Whether it's California, Arizona,
We need to
Texas.
figure out how we can send ours to them.
Well, that's what they do. That's what, you know, the water that serves California is coming from Colorado, and we sell tons of water from the state of Washington.
It's interesting because when they set the in-stream flows, they set them proportionately higher than they'd ever been historically. And they did that for a reason. They did that because they were afraid at this time that California was going to put pressure on the north to send them water, and they didn't want to do that. So we arbitrarily, decades ago, and to our own detriment in some cases because it's made the water rights game harder, did that to prevent that from happening. The other driver for reclaimed water in this area actually has nothing to do with water resources as we think about it, but everything to do with TMDL. So people are trying to reduce their TMDL because it increases the capacity of your plant. If our TMDL is much lower, I can actually serve more
What's
people.
TMDL?
Total daily maximum load.
It's fecal counts in the bay.
Right. if I can reduce that number, I can increase the amount of ERUs that I can take at my plant because I'm not discharging that to whatever body of water I'm in. So there are financial components to reclaim that make some sense, but I say that with a caveat.
But not from a water resources standpoint yet.
Right. If you're only using 5% on the Kitsap Peninsula of your annual withdrawal, you gotta get a lot closer to 50, 60 before you start talking investing the kind of money that it takes to go to a Class B or Class A.
Right, and West Sound found that out. They spent all that money on putting the membrane bioreactor in, the cost of treating that to a Class A. They got a grant to run a pipe up the hill, and nobody wanted the water. The school district didn't want the water, the Army didn't want water, the Kitsap Retzel Park didn't want the water. Now, 200 years from now,
That'll be another story.
they'll want that water potentially, but for now it wasn't cost effective. And there's a lot of buildings that were plumbed in kind of the early 2000s that everybody is on this purple pipe bandwagon, and there's purple pipe in the walls.
Well, isn't the hospital in Silverdale going to be using purple
Silverdale's in a little bit of
reclaimed water?
Yeah, they're in a little bit of a different situation if you look at it, because Kitsap County has decided that they want to be proactive as far as their TMDL count, and they want to make sure that, they take such a huge area. That Brownsville plant is massive. So they're trying to increase the capacity in that plant, and we also know that Ecology is continuing to put pressure on sewer purveyors, I guess, to reduce their TMDL. So they are
in cities. We have a TMDL. The EPA and Ecology have hit Port Orchard. So Sinclair Inlet has a TMDL, Dyes Inlet has a TMDL, Liberty Bay has a TMDL. Once you have a TMDL, you have to manage that, and that's part of our permit.
Yeah, so Kitsap County is going to make reclaimed water either way. Silverdale's just going to benefit from it. They've invested a lot of money in pipe. I will say that.
Must have.
So
That's a big facility, huh?
yeah.
And it makes sense for a facility like that because they use so much water.
Yeah.
But for a little woody walk-up professional building that's got purple pipe in it, it's going to sit there a while before it gets used.
Yeah, it's more for golf courses and things like that.
Yeah.
All right. Well, a lot of great information.
Okay.
Else to bring you up.
Well, that's all right. It's going to take a while.
Okay, Marina Pump Station. So this is really, I think the last time we were just going out to add. And so this is more just to let you know that we've actually, we sent out an RFQ. We scored the RFQs. We selected 2 firms to interview. We've actually interviewed those 2 firms, and we've selected RH2 to do the Marina Pump Station. That's the one where we have the $4 million, 4.2 million? 4.1 million. It's a loan.
Yes.
And so we're in so in your packet was the scoring sheets and then the RFQ that we sent out. So this is just an update. Where we're at currently is the design team is starting to work on scope and budget, but we're also in an intentional slowdown, even though I don't want to slow down on this, but there's some redevelopment conversations along the part of the pilot project, the MUP, mixed use pilot project, that before we finalize what we're doing here, we need to have a better idea exactly of what's happening down there, because we're looking at potentially relocating the Marina Pump Station and where we have lines coming in and out. So there's this moment in time when we'll have enough information to finalize the scope and the budget. Right now we don't. Waiting 2 months isn't going to change the grand scheme of things. So, like I said, the design team is working on general outline of the scope, and then we'll finalize it here in June. Yeah. Okay. Well 9, so there's 2 updates there. The one update, thought I had something in the packet, but I don't. The water quality retrofit, the update there is it's back out on the street, re-advertised for the, what, 3rd time, 2nd time? It's actually being, it was uploaded last Friday, and March 30th is the new opening. So there were 2 projects that we issued. And did we talk about this the other night?
No, I don't think so.
So there were two projects that we issued, McCormick and Well 9. And on both, we had a situation because the value was over $1 million. And we had bids challenged because the number 1 on both hadn't provided a subcontractor list. And it's in the RCW that for any value of work that's over $1 million, the contractor is required to provide a subcontractor list. We then got into an issue where then there was the conversation about what was it the city's responsibility to have that in our standard contract versus the contractor's supposed to know this, right? It's like prevailing wage. And we had an opinion initially that no, it's not the city's responsibility. And so, but we had initially rejected the bids because in both cases the number 1 lowest bid hadn't provided it. But then the number 2s that had, when we rejected it, they said, wait a minute, time out. I provided it, why are you penalizing me? And so then we had an official challenge of our rejecting all bids. The direction then was, my legal counsel was, they're right. So we were then going to award. So we pulled our re-advertisements because you have to get it to the POI on Tuesdays for it to be on Friday. So we had it all ready to the POI on Wednesday. We then pulled it because we had challenges by the number 2 that had provided, and we had legal counsel that said, yep, they're right. After we had pulled it and it was too late to re-advertise, then we had AWC come back and take the opposite position that the attorney said, no, you are required to provide it. It's like prevailing wage, and that you need to either have a link or have the prevailing wage in the contract. So we lost a week because then we had to wait till the following Tuesday to re-advertise again. So it was so now we have that language in our standard contract form that talks about RCW, whatever it is, 39, whatever, that talks about if a value is more than $1 million, you are required. It's for mechanical, electrical, landscaping, I don't know, there's certain categories, and those categories don't have to be over $1 million. It's the overall contract value, anything over then requires you to have a subcontractor list for those items. And it turned out that on both, there was I think it was the electrical, that was the big one. So long story short, we're re-advertising. Those went out Friday. We'll open up those bids. We're going to have a shortened, no, we're having the full 3 weeks. So that we're opening those on the 30th.
The nice thing too is that we might have an opportunity to realize some cost savings,
Yes.
because if everybody knows what everybody else's number is, then you go back to the office and sharpen your pencil.
Yeah, people weren't happy, but it's you're fully exposed at that point, and
Right.
yeah. So for those that really want the work, yeah, they're going to have to sharpen their pencil.
Did
They're
they
gonna
ask
go-
for each other's proposals?
We're
'Cause they
required.
can.
We're required to provide it.
Okay.
Yeah.
We
You can
read
do
them
that.
publicly at the opening, but they're those people are gonna go back to their offices, and the first thing they're gonna do is they're gonna call all their subs and say, I need you to find me 2%.
Right.
if you want the work.
Now, we're not required to provide them with a full bid tab. So there's two bid tabs. There's what I'll call is the tally. That's where everybody's bid opening number is there. That's what we provide. We then build a spreadsheet. Mike, builds the spreadsheet for every single item, all 362 or whatever they are, 118, depends on the project, where they put in for each contractor every subgrade excavation unit price, and it's a lot of work. But ultimately, you do that so that when you select, and then whoever's selected, that becomes the document that Mike will be working off of from a construction manager standpoint. He'll be tracking those quantities, and that's how they'll get paid.
And you'd be surprised how often the contractor
There's math errors.
screwed up, and it can jockey. Year 1, 2, 3, 4 can change to 2, 4, 1.
So that's part of what we have to go through is we're doing it initially on everybody to check math. And we have math errors. Again, sometimes it changes it, sometimes it doesn't. And in this particular case, luckily I was able to have Mike not start down that. He had started, but then we had a timeout.
Well, look at the major error in the Tremont.
Well, exactly.
That's what I was
that,
thinking.
That was huge.
well, that one was pretty
Unreal,
obvious.
really.
Yeah, it was like, wait a minute, you're missing
So the person
half
who
of your,
submitted it.
half your, it just
Whoops.
moving too fast. So
Yes.
anyway, so we're opening those. The other piece is just to let you know that despite a few stops and starts, we actually do have a draft demand letter now where that's with Pace Engineers. So on well 9, now that we knew initially that there was an errors and omissions because the treatment wasn't working. But now that we've actually redesigned and added the filtration, we have a much more robust list of understanding of this wasn't right, this wasn't right, this wasn't right. So,
Will that mean some kind of compensation?
yeah. Well, hopefully. I mean, we would hope that their insurance company would go, yeah, we should probably just pay this instead of going to court.
Yeah, typically with a firm, they're not gonna want to have to put that on their record as if they, were taken to court. So
Right.
it'd be easier to, And at this point, I think that them doing any sort of engineering services in lieu of payment would be out the door.
Right.
Right.
Right, you
But
probably
there's-
won't be making use of their services anymore, right?
No, we've long since parted, but
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
the issue was that we had just started when we had McGavitt Graves, and then that stopped, and then Morris came in and
Yes.
had started, and then that stopped, and then it's taken a while for Lighthouse to get to it, but they finally had it on their radar with some prodding, and so we have the demand letter, and the demand letter is the first stop. It's here's the letter from our attorney that says, we're challenging these things, and we'll see what happens. So we're finally to the point of issuing a demand letter, and I can't recall. I have to check with Sharon. I think the demand letter itself will be reviewed probably on the 27th. Potentially at an executive session conversation because it's pending litigation. So I will verify that and I'll reflect that in the notes.
Okay. This was a meaty meeting. There's a lot in it.
Yeah, for a small agenda, but we wanted to be thorough.
Uh-huh.
I guess if the mayor's here, we would have been over 20 minutes ago, but he would have jumped us for
Some of the
time.
background is good for Jay.
Yeah, and so, and I tend to be.
I'll get more next Thursday.
Yeah.
We have to remind him it's the committee's meeting.
It is a committee's meeting.
Yeah.
We're
He
good.
certainly tells them what it is, but it's your meeting. So-
Well, I go a lot off of body language, and so there's a lot of yeah. Then I'm gonna skip through it, but this is your opportunity to understand the topic, and if you don't understand it here, then please let Thomas or I know to have more information. But yeah, you're right. This is your meeting, and if you want more information, this is your chance really to get it. So
I've got a
You
lot
can-
of lookups, so once I'm finished, I'm meeting with Thomas on Thursday.
Yes.
Yeah, Thursday, so I'll have questions for him on Thursday and then get back in the groove, so, yeah, it's good.
yeah, so
Don't worry, I won't hesitate to ask.
okay. No, I wouldn't expect you would. So do we have a time?
Yeah,
The time is 10:22.
So I have a question, and that is, I have not a conflict, but 10:45 I have to usually leave because I have a meeting standing meeting at 11. So my question is, because these are scheduled for 90 minutes, are we usually done in that meeting?
We're-
An hour or less.
Hour.
Okay, so that would be fine to keep my
Very
meeting at 11
unusual
o'clock.
to have it go
Because I need
beyond that.
15 minutes to get back.
Oh,
Okay,
yeah,
that's
yeah.
fine.
Yeah,
Okay.
no, it'll never be an issue. And if it ever does, you can just get up and.
Well, I
say,
know, but at the same time, I don't want to be
Yeah.
rude.
These
No.
come to me, yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
I'm just trying to,
Most of them are a half hour,
Yes.
40 minutes.
Pretty quick. Uh-huh.
Okay.
Well, not economic development.
So, do you have future agenda items where you're looking for input, or are these just on the list you'd be bringing
These
to
are-
the committee?
I mean, if there's something that you want specific, I just started tracking these 10 years ago.
Okay.
Things come off. These are more just things that have historically popped up and then have gone away again. And instead of just having them not there, I started creating that list
Kind of running the list.
just so that I can periodically.
Reference.
Yeah, I'll look through and then so for example, the top two, the McCormick Communities, that was in the regular agenda, but it's gonna come back next meeting probably, so I moved it down. The 2019-24 permit, last meeting, we did an update, but there was some new information coming on the TMDL that we didn't have enough. It was gonna be on this agenda again, but we hadn't heard back precisely on what we were wanting to hear back on, so I just moved it down. So these are placeholders.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
So, okay?
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah.